The answers were honestly all over the place. What's going on? I'm John, and in the last video I finished up the last 4 scenes of my first draft on my birthday. It was a lot of fun, but since then it's been 4 days and I haven't really written anything. And this is because I realized that I don't really know what to do next in this process. This is my first novel, so what do I do next? That is what I'm going to try to figure out during this video, what I'm going to answer, and what I'm going to start working on. So I'm mainly trying to answer 3 questions. First, how long should I let this first draft sit for? I know that Stephen King recommends letting it sit for 6 weeks at least in on writing, but I would like to see what some other people think, as well as what are the pluses and minuses of waiting for a shorter amount of time versus a longer amount of time. Next, I want to figure out what should I be doing while this draft is sitting. I know it's going to take multiple weeks, more than a month most likely, so that's a lot of time that I could be doing something during. But I don't really know what I should be doing during this time. I need to work on writing more effective descriptions. So I was thinking that poetry would be a good medium for this, especially since it's so concise. I'm probably going to be writing some poetry during this vlog, but I do want to find out what other people have done and what they've found to be useful. What would be the most effective use of this time? So that is the second question I'm going to be answering. And lastly, and most importantly, what exactly should I be doing after I let this novel sit? What should I be doing? What steps should I be taking? What order should I be taking them? That is another huge question that I want to answer during this video. So those are my 3 questions that I'm going to be figuring out. So today I'm going to be answering the question, what should I actually be doing during this period where I'm letting the novel sit? What sort of things would be the most effective? I'm going to do some research and try to figure out what would be the most effective. I'll share the things that I found most interesting, as well as my thoughts on them, and then I'm going to decide what I'm going to be doing during this time. But before I actually start the research for today, I just realized it's already 8 o'clock, and I usually do my runs on the days where I do run around 7 to 8. So I'm thinking that I'm gonna go do my run first, because today I have my longest run so far, 3.5 miles. And then I'll come back and start on that research like I said I was gonna do. Today is the last day of the second week of my Haruki Murakami 10K for multiple days training program. I'm basically just moving it up by half a mile every week. My long run is gonna get longer by that much until we reach 6. And then, wow, the sun is really bright behind me. And then after that, I think I'll maintain it a little bit longer just to kind of get myself used to running and get my legs ready to actually do this. I'm just walking to warm up right now, and I'm gonna get into the running in just a bit. So I'll show you a little bit of that. Okay, so I'm about 1.5 miles in, so I have 2 miles left to go, and I'll check back with you then. Okay, so I finished the run and just took a shower. It was a little bit difficult today, not because the running was actually difficult, but my knees are feeling a little beat up recently. So I had to take it a little more easy than I would have liked to. Since I enjoy pushing myself physically so much, it's very easy for me to push myself to the point of injury. So I'm trying to be a little smarter and just take it more easily. So today I had to do a little bit of walking, but hopefully my knees and my legs overall will adjust over time and it won't be a big deal. Anyway, so I'm gonna go make some breakfast and read this book by Stephen King, 11/22/63. Shows you how much I remember about these dates. I actually already finished It Ends With Us a few days ago, so I'll tell you more about that a little bit later. But right now, I'm really hungry, so I'm just gonna go eat something. So I'm finally back from eating breakfast / reading. So without further ado, let's get into this actual research. Okay, that should be enough tabs. Okay, so I just finished up a bunch of research, but this was actually a decently hard question to answer because people don't really talk about it too much directly. More often you see people talking about the other 2 questions, like how long should you set aside your draft before going back into it? And then after you've set it aside, what should you do? So this was more of like a tangential part of articles surrounding both of those questions, but I did find some varying opinions on it, and the two most common were take a break from writing, basically, spend time with family, spend time with friends, do some things that are not around writing and get your mind off of it completely. Or on the other side of the spectrum, write, but write something different. And as someone who's taken a full 4 days off of writing and is already feeling like that was too much, I'm thinking that I'm going to go with the second solution. And this fits exactly with some of the things that I have been thinking about doing ever since I was approaching the end of this draft. So one of the types of writing that I'm going to do during this period is writing poetry. And this is because I've noticed when I'm writing that I'm susceptible to white room syndrome, so I don't even remember to include the descriptions sometimes. And the ones that I do include, I don't think that they are clear enough, they're concise enough, or accurate enough. And I think that by writing some poetry, I'll be able to work on those skills and learn to write more clearly and concisely in my descriptions. The next thing that I'm going to be writing is something I'm actually very excited to write about because I've wanted to write this for quite a while. You see, I've been working on some variation of this first draft for a very long time, so I wasn't allowing myself to write anything else. And there's this story that I stumbled upon basically while I was writing a writing prompt a long time ago, over a year ago, and I wanted to write it since that moment basically. So I think I'm gonna write it in the form of a short story just because I don't want to attack another full draft right now. I don't want to create more revision and editing work down the line for myself yet, until I've gotten through the process with a complete novel first. I'm gonna tell this as a short story, and then if I want to, then I can expand it into a full-length novel. And for the short stories and poetry, I think I'm going to make full-length videos about those as well, but I also think that I'll be including small elements of them in this video because I'm going to start writing the poetry today, and I'm going to be planning the short story coming up really soon. Speaking of, I'm going to start writing the poetry now. I think I'm gonna write a few different forms today and see what I'm kind of liking. I'm gonna start with a sonnet, even though I'm not trying to write anything romantic at all. So today I'm going to be answering the question, how long should I actually let my book sit for? There's varying opinions that I've seen on this. Stephen King, of course, says 6 weeks, but some people say as short as 2 weeks or even a week. And some people say as long as 90 days or more. What the things to consider are with this, why some people say a longer amount and why some people say a shorter amount, and try to figure out which one I actually want to go with. Let's get right into the actual research. Okay, so I just finished doing my research on the question, how long should you let your novel sit for? And the answers were honestly all over the place. People said as short as don't wait at all, just get right into editing as soon as you finish it, no big deal. People also said wait for a year or even longer than that. But the thing that I noticed about these recommendations is that most of them didn't seem to be based on anything other than the person's opinion at the time of writing. So I don't really think that they were that valuable from that perspective. So I'm thinking of erring on the side of going a little too long. And here's why. The last article that I read actually I think was the best one on this topic. And in the article, she talked about how you want to let your memories of what happens in the story, of the characters, of all of the elements of the story become a little bit fuzzy in your memory. And the way that memory works is that when you recall something, when you are exposed to it again, your memory for that thing becomes strengthened. So say that I only waited 4 weeks or something, a month, and then I go back to it and I realize that the memory isn't fuzzy enough. Well, I've just strengthened my memories for the concepts that were introduced during that little scene that I read. And because of that, I'm causing those to need even more time to get into that fuzzy state. So I'm gonna err on the side of caution and go with a longer break period because I can always think of more things to do, more things to write about during this period and find ways to improve my skills and experiment with different things. So I'm not really worried about not having writing to be able to do. Some of the people's recommendations of starting on a separate book actually did make me think about writing another book, even though I haven't finished this one. So I'm not gonna buy into that fully yet. I'm not necessarily saying right here, oh, I'm gonna write my second book already, first draft, but I'm open to it. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this poetry thing that I've been talking about. I'm going to write this short story at the very least, and then if I really like the short story, I may expand it into an outline for a full novel. And if I still have time after that, then I may start writing that. So how long am I actually going to wait? I think I'm going to wait 3 months. I'm going to err on the side of caution. I'm going to leave a nice long chunk of time. And during that time, I'm going to be able to work on other stuff. I'm going to be able to improve my skills in writing in other ways. So I don't think that it's going to be that detrimental to wait longer. I don't think there's any real risk of me waiting longer, because the only thing that somebody brought up as far as like why not to wait longer is motivation. You don't want to have so much distance from the project that you forget about it and you don't care and you don't want to write it anymore. But I don't really have a problem with that. I know that I'm going to finish this book. I told myself I was going to do it, so it's going to happen. So it's not like I really need to worry about, oh no, I'm not going to feel motivated to work on it. No, I'm going to write it. I'm going to finish the project. This is my first complete project. I need to finish it so that I know the process from beginning to end. I have a basic process. Since I don't really have to worry about that motivation aspect, I think it's more important to err on the side of caution, err on the side of waiting too long, and just let it sit for 3 months. So in a few months, I guess, we will be reading through that draft together. But until then, I'm going to be working on some other stuff, and one of those things that I'm going to be working on is writing poetry. That is what I'm going to be doing right now. So I'm just going to get into that writing, and I'll tell you afterward how it all went. Okay, so I just finished writing my poems for the day, and today things turned out a little bit differently. Yesterday when I was writing them, I felt like the structured ones, like the villanelle and the sonnet, were actually more fun to do, and I had trouble with the free verse and didn't really feel like they came out that well. But today I felt like the free verse actually came out really well. And what I did today differently was I basically tried not to apply any sort of structure to them. I just tried to explore and kind of write and see where the words went, basically, and I found that to yield a much better result for the free verse poems. But yeah, I am enjoying writing these poems, and I do think that it's going to help with my description. I actually don't think that I'm terrible at description or anything like that, but I do forget to put it in. So I do think this will help me, at least in the sense that I'm writing these poems about specific topics each day. So today I was writing about volcanoes, yesterday I was writing with the theme of winter, and all of these themes will have images that lend themselves to my story. So if there are parts where I didn't really include certain images, I didn't really describe anything, I'll at least have a few words here or there that I can insert into some of those gaps. And I'll have at least explored these ideas a little bit so that maybe I can generate something interesting. So that's how it's actually going to feed into the story, although I'm trying to be very conscious about not thinking about the story while I'm doing this, because that's defeating the whole purpose of taking a break and trying to forget about it. So today I specifically was like, wait a second. I was thinking about writing a little bit like through the eyes of the protagonist toward the climax of the story. I was like, wait, this is going to totally connect me to the story. Get out of here. I'm just focusing on the volcano stuff. That's it. So it all worked out in the end, and I ended up writing some pretty cool poems actually. I think my favorite form so far is the villanelle, just because I like the restriction of having the same lines repeat throughout the poem, and I think it's really cool having them tie everything together. And next, I want to talk a little bit about my experience reading my first romance, because this is a whole new thing for me. I've never done it before. So I'm just going to reflect on it a little bit, and then I'll get back to you with some of my thoughts. So as I mentioned in the past, I have been reading It Ends With Us, and I just finished it a few days ago, and I had some thoughts and reflections on reading my first Western romance. So first of all, I do want to say that I did enjoy this story overall. However, there was one little thing that I found a little bit dissonant in the beginning, and I want to cover that first before we get into the fun stuff. Basically what this was that I had trouble relating to Lily, and I had trouble buying the whole romance in the beginning. And here's why. Ryle is supposed to be attractive, he's supposed to be a neurosurgeon, he's supposed to be rich, so he's got a lot of things going for him. And then on the other hand, we have Lily. She's supposed to be attractive, but other than that, she seems like she's a relatively average sort of person. And here's where this ended up being a problem for me. I wasn't able to connect with Lily easily in this situation because I was looking at things through Ryle's perspective. I was not looking at things through Lily's perspective. I was looking at them in like the male side of the relationship, and it didn't really make sense to me. I was like, why would Ryle want to be with her? I don't understand. So it was kind of difficult for me to like him as a character because that hurt my ability to relate to him. And I wasn't really relating very well to Lily as a character because I just felt like she was just this person somehow somehow stumbling into this amazing situation for no reason. And I want to leave a little disclaimer here. I understand that I am not the audience for this novel. No romance author is trying to write these novels for a 27-year-old male. I completely understand that. However, from the perspective of a person trying to read and enjoy this, I had trouble relating to the characters because of that, and it left me with this feeling of dissonance. Like, I didn't really think this was realistic, didn't really make sense. And I understand this is probably not as big of a deal for some female readers reading it. When you're looking at it from that perspective, when you're trying to vicariously live through this character, I can understand how that could be fun. I mean, I've watched some anime that are kind of like this from the other direction. There's a specific genre, it's literally called harem anime, and it's like the male character is just this normal guy. He's completely boring. There's nothing at all that's attractive about him. And somehow every single girl that he meets is in love with him for no reason. So I understand this whole device. I understand this in stories, but for me reading it, I had trouble connecting with the characters because of this. And it almost made me not want to continue reading. But there was one thing that was keeping me curious enough to keep me reading, and I'm happy that I did because I definitely enjoyed the latter half of the story a lot. Before I get into it, I do want to mention that there are going to be some potential spoilers here, and I'm going to be talking about at least one of the important moments in this story. So if you want to come to this story fresh and you haven't had a chance to read it yet, then I'm going to leave a little timestamp here that you can use to just skip ahead so you don't have to deal with any spoilers here. But if you have read it, let's get into it. So the part of the story that I actually really did connect with well was the whole domestic violence element. In the present day, when Lily has this perfect life, basically, for some reason, she just basically stumbled into it, I had trouble buying that. But when she was growing up kind of rough, when her mom was in a really tough situation and she was in a really tough situation as well, I could identify with Lily a lot more and I could root for her a lot more in that situation. So I really liked the journals, and I thought it was really cute how she was like writing to Ellen, even though super cheesy. And her voice in those journals was really, really realistic. I loved those because she was so idealistic and naive in the journals, and it feels just like somebody who's really young and wants to change everything about the world without actually having experienced very much of it yet. I really liked that. I really thought her voice was like perfect for a teenager, and her relationship with Atlas I liked a lot more than her relationship with Ryle in the beginning. Anyway though, that kept me reading for long enough to get to the part when it really started to get interesting, because that first situation when Ryle pushes her away, that was awesome. And it wasn't awesome in like this like really mean sense of like, haha, suck it Lily. It was awesome in like this sense of knowing where Lily came from and knowing her background and knowing that she's had this past of like living in this household where there was domestic violence, and here she is experiencing this first little hint. It was really like this huge moment, and I think it was written really well too. The way that it's written in the story, it's so sudden, and it makes you just like your mouth just drop. You're like, oh my god, what just happened right now? How the heck is Lily going to respond to this? Now I'm interested. I definitely enjoyed the story from that point on, and I thought it was a really cool exploration of the mindset of somebody trying to live through the situation of a domestic violence relationship and trying to figure out how to cope with it and somehow get out of it. I really thought that part of the story was great to read, and I would be happy to read that part of the story again. It was just the beginning that I had trouble with. When it seems too fantastical, I didn't really believe their relationship or really care that much about either of the characters. But when Lily was in this situation that's really rough, then I could relate to her a lot more, and I was like, God, Lily, get out of this, please. Okay, so where does that leave us with Western romance? Am I going to actually read more of them? I think I still will read more of them. However, I think this book is exceptional in the genre. I don't think that it's the standard for the genre, at least looking at the ratings that I've seen for other books in the genre. So that makes me think that most books probably won't have this same sort of interesting element that I enjoyed. I'm very sure that most of them won't have the domestic violence element, and that's not exactly what I'm looking for, but I think that most of them will be more like the beginning of the story that I didn't really like that much, where somehow this normal woman ends up with this amazing man who's basically the perfect guy. I don't really care that much about that sort of story, but I do still see one type of romance that I could potentially like that might still be fun for me and that I might still like to write, and that is a dual POV. Well, first of all, we need to have a relationship that actually seems like it's plausible, where it makes sense that the two lead characters would actually be attracted to each other and would actually be okay with being in a relationship with each other. I think that it would help me to have that perspective from the male character, because then through his eyes, through his mind, I could connect more easily to the female character and I could start to actually like her. And if that's the case, then I think it would be much easier for me to enjoy a story like that. But if I only have the female perspective and I feel like I don't really buy the relationship, I don't really buy the fact that he would be interested in her, then it's going to be very difficult for me to enjoy a story like that. Just because it's hard to suspend my disbelief when I literally can't vicariously live through the female character because I am not ever going to be a female in a relationship. It's really just not for me if that's what the story is going to be like, and that's all that the story is going to have in it. This book was different in that it didn't have just that. So I'm looking for some stories that are going to be a little bit more even with the attractiveness of the characters, where it actually makes sense they both like each other. So if there's romances like that, and if you have any suggestions, like, please let me know, because I have no idea about this genre still, and I'm just trying to find something to see if I actually like it and get some exposure. And I'm always looking for more books to read anyway. So that's all I got for my thoughts on It Ends With Us. Overall, I did really enjoy this book, and especially the parts toward the second half of the story. That really made the story for me. Let me know what your experience was with this book, because I'm definitely curious to see how other people interpreted it. Okay, so today I'm going to be answering, finally, the most important question, which is how exactly am I going to go about doing this revision? What is the order of the steps going to look like? How is all of this going to work? What specifically am I going to do? How am I going to get this book into a place where it's actually a complete product instead of its current unedited, unrevised, unpolished state? Okay, so today my schedule was a little bit weird, so I'm actually going to go and do the poetry first. So let's go write that. And then after that, I'm going to do the research about how I'm going to revise this novel. I just got back from looking through all that information, all those articles, compiling what I'm going to do into a specific plan. Okay, so the first step I'm going to do after my break is read through and note down the big picture story problems. Just for some examples, this is taken from Sandra Gerth's site. She says, are there any plot holes? Is your attention flagging, indicating a scene should be cut or tightened? Are characters unlikable or flat? Is the story's conflict too weak? Is your beginning a little boring? I'm going to look for big picture problems like that. Another thing that I'm going to do when I'm reading through is take note of certain scientific things that feel a little bit fuzzy for me, that I still might have questions about. I'm going to take down some questions from those, and I'll compile all these questions into categories based on the specific area of science. And then I'm going to find a few experts from each of these areas and ask them these questions to figure out what is correct, because these are definitely big things that could impact the overall story, and I want to knock them out first. After I fix those problems in the story, then I'm going to go back and look through and try to find these smaller things. For example, showing versus telling, continuity, POV misses, dialogue problems, smaller stuff like that. Basically, I'm going to try to focus on getting the writing mechanics right. Then I'm going to read it again, but out loud this time, and look for different problems that I didn't notice the first time. I'm going to revise these smaller problems, like sentence structure problems or paragraphs that don't really seem like they're cohesive, overusing certain words or certain parts of speech, things like those. I'm also going to create and go through a self-editing checklist where I'm going to make sure I'm not overusing certain words or phrases, or using misspellings of certain words or inconsistent spellings of certain words. For instance, I'm pretty sure that I used the word gray with British English spelling somewhere in the beginning before I realized that I needed to be consistent with this. So I'm pretty sure that I have some British English spellings in there, and I'm gonna have to go through and change those over to American English. And I don't really know all of these common mistakes that I make, so I'm going to be noting these down as I go through for future edits where I can actually look for these mistakes in advance and know the common things that I do. Okay, and after I've done all the editing I can, then I'm going to send the whole thing to my editor just to do a structural edit, basically, where she's going to look at the story overall and make sure that the story itself looks solid. Once I've made any changes based on that and I've gone through the overall story problems, finally I'm going to find some beta readers that are readers of the genre that I'm writing, this post-apocalyptic sort of sci-fi genre, and I'm going to send the book to those readers and see what they think of it. I'll get back more suggestions from them and make those changes as needed. Then I'm going to send it to my editor for line edits. Then I'm going to make those changes, look through all of the changes except the ones that I think should be made, or make the changes to match whatever she said in my own way. Finally, I'm going to send it to a proofreader, which I still need to find, and after they make those changes, I will look through it one more time, and then I will finally have a finished novel. I'm not even sure that I'm going to publish it anyway, but I do want to go through all these steps because I know that I'm going to learn so much from doing this process, especially like the smaller fine-grained details where I have these things that I'm doing incorrectly. I think it could be really useful to go through all that and to just drill them into my brain so that I understand how to write them the right way when I'm actually writing the first draft and I don't have to come back and fix so many problems in the future. So that is the process that I've gone through for these 3 days. I have figured out now what I'm going to do while I'm letting this sit. I figured out how long I'm going to let it sit for, and I figured out how I'm going to revise after it is done sitting. If you like this video, make sure to smash that like button to let YouTube know to share with other writers like you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. I did it again. Let us begin. It's been a while since I've been in front of the camera, hasn't it? Okay, like 4 days. So today is the last day of these